My wife and I have 3 boys. Currently they are 9, 6, and 4. And they're a handful. Like, there's no other way to explain these boys other than just the word wild. You know how, like, sometimes if you're a parent, you'll be out in public and maybe you'll have people that'll just come up to you and say, you know, wow, your kids are so well behaved. What's your secret? What have you done to raise kids that are just so well behaved in public? Well, I have never had that conversation with anyone, like not even one time. Our boys are just like crazy. But it's interesting, my youngest son, Brewer, he's the one that's like really a handful sometimes. And the other day, my wife was out on a girls' night and I had the 3 boys. And so I'm watching them and we're just kind of hanging out together. And the one thing that can kind of keep my youngest still is if I put him in front of the TV and if I feed him these little fruit snacks, which there's no fruit in them, but they're in the shape of fruit, and that makes you feel better as a parent. And I'm just giving him one after another. And I finally realized that he's had way too many. It's like time to cut him off. And so I tell him, I said, Brewer, no more fruit snacks. Well, he starts to throw this massive fit, and he is screaming and he's crying, and I pick him up off the floor and he's arching his back and he starts to scream, I want my mommy. I want my mommy. And I'm thinking, yeah, I want your mommy too. But as he's screaming this, it kind of hits me. You know what? He doesn't really want his mommy. He wants what he thinks his mommy might give him. You know, it kind of hit me in that moment that so often describes my relationship with God. My so-called crying out to Him, my so-called prayers, even my so-called worship, it's not really about wanting God. It's about what I think God might give me. Doesn't that describe your relationship with God from time to time? We're not as concerned with God as we are what we think God might give us. So we begin to view God kind of like this cosmic vending machine. We start to think that our good deeds become this currency that we use to get from God what we want. In reality, what we want is our dreams more than we want God. And your dreams, no matter how great, will always make a lousy God. The book of Job is like peering in on a journal of a man's thoughts that are going through one big, massive plan B. For a better part of this book, like 28 chapters worth, Job shoots his questions towards God. He expresses plenty of anger and confusion from this dark place. And the whole situation is made worse by 3 friends who suggest to Job over and over that this whole calamity has been brought on by his own sin. Job's friends feel very familiar to me. Their arguments sound so much like these common religious misconceptions that I grew up with. It was often impressed on me that people were not healed because they didn't pray enough or fast enough or read the Bible enough or even believe enough. If life wasn't working out the way they thought life should be working out, if God wasn't showing up in the way they wanted God to show up, it just meant that you weren't measuring up to what God wanted from you. The problem with this assumption, of course, is that it just leads to out-of-control legalism. The real problem is that it's just not true. I love what Peter Scazzero wrote. He said that Job was an innocent sufferer, that his friends had no room for the confusing in between, no room for mystery. Like many Christians today, they overestimated their grasp on truth, and they played God, and they stood in God's shoes. Perhaps you thought that when you became a Christian, that you would just have answers to all of life's difficulties. But here's a reality check for you. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean that we know how to respond to everything that comes our way. Being Christian doesn't mean that we have all the answers. I'm just so frustrated with this version of Christianity where we actually think our theology can fit into a bumper sticker, a t-shirt, or a bracelet. Reality just isn't that simple. I mean, the reality is that we Christians often have more questions than we do answers. Sometimes we lack the faith to give us a sustained hope. And even though we know that God is with us, sometimes we feel utterly and completely alone. Even though we believe, we also doubt. You know, Job is a reminder to all of us that there will be times when it seems like we're doing everything right, and then out of nowhere, we're just thrust into this plan B. You know, everyone experiences times of hurt and crisis, times when life turns out the way that it shouldn't, and we're stuck in the middle of this plan B. But Job is also a reminder that how we respond to God during these times really matters. And we're called to be faithful to God, even when it seems like He hasn't been faithful to us. We're called to love Him, even when we feel like He's abandoned us. We're called to look for Him, even in the midst of the darkness. We're called to worship Him, even through our tears. Why are you going through what you're going through? I don't know. Will it be over soon? I don't know. Will how you respond matter more than you could ever imagine? I was in Canada recently and doing a book signing for Plan B. And there's a woman that was in the line who just kind of caught my attention, and we started to talk, and she started to just share a little bit about her story. And we actually took a moment to kind of sit down because I could tell that just emotionally she was going through a whole lot. And as she began to tell her story of what had happened in her life over the past couple years, I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had a son, her only son, who actually had committed murder, had murdered his wife, murdered his daughter, who happened to be her 7-year-old granddaughter, and then turned the gun on himself. And she just started to talk about just the whole crisis of belief that she had been through. She talked about the pain, she talked about the suffering, she talked about how she continued to blame herself for how these things could happen and why these things could happen. And we spent a lot of time just kind of talking through a lot of that. And I asked her, I said, Karen, do you feel like you're bitter at God? You know, do you feel angry at God because these things happened? And I'll never forget her response. She said, no, I'm not really mad at God. She said, I believe that there is a God, and it's not me. And so while I don't understand why this would happen, I don't understand exactly what it is that God could possibly do to redeem something like this, I trust that He's God and that I'm not. I don't believe that God's doing something to me, but maybe God's trying to do something through me. Now, my question for you is, in the midst of the different crises that you experience, can you do that? Have you done that? I mean, plan B is just wreaking havoc in your life and God doesn't seem to be doing a thing, can you still worship Him? Can you still follow Him when He's not orchestrating the circumstances of your life in the way that you desire? Do you still trust Him enough to seek Him with reckless abandon? You see, we must all be willing, if necessary, to abandon the life that we've planned and dreamed of in order to receive the life that our God has authored for us.